Dr. Brian Pinto doesn't agree to this, and he says there is a role, definite role. Only the trials are not able to show the difference.
Thank you, Harish. I think he himself showed the last slide where he disagrees with himself. Because I just want to ask all of you one question. Here is a trial which was done in Germany in 600 patients over 3 years. And I'm going to ask this learned audience over here, how many of you have stopped using the IABP completely after reading the SHOCK 2 trial? I can tell you it's not many. Many still use the balloon pump to assist us to get to early revascularization. No question, early revascularization is the answer. But without support, I can tell you it's very difficult. And if we take an audience poll over here, I'm sure you'll get an audience poll that says that IABP is not condemned to the dustbin. We have a lot of people who still use it. And why is that? Let's look what the SHOCK trial really did. Can you look at it? This is Germany. These are 40 plus centers doing this trial on 600 patients over a 3-year period. Can you tell me how many patients they did per year? This is something that Harish did not really concentrate on. It's very important. They started in 2009. They stopped in 2012. Each site did not do even 5 patients. Many of them possibly did not know how to put in an IABP. And it's clear about this because some of the sites put in less than 2 IABPs per year. We in our institutions put in more than 5 IABPs per month, and I can see, and I know Harish uses it also, can see there's a big difference that you see in these particular patients. And I'll get to you as we go forward. All this was already spoken about, the number of patients who were taken up, randomized, 600 patients, 300 on either side, with equivalent kind of positions. But there are certain fallacies in the SHOCK trial which I'd like to bring out. Look at the duration. Too long, too small a sample size, as I mentioned. Only the 30-day mortality available to you, nothing longer than that. No data further. Look at the timing. He himself mentioned it. Most of us want support before, not support after. And very often in 86% of patients, you had support after. Is that the right way? The timing was left up to the individual operator. I don't think that's the way a trial can be really designed. You've got to have more stringent kind of situations to design a trial. And they excluded the most important use of IABP was excluded. If a patient had papillary muscle rupture or if he had a ventricular septal defect, he was told you can't use IABP. Now wherein comes the question? And a large number of patients who have circumflex territory and LAD infarcts have significant mitral regurgitation. And those patients were taken up in few numbers. Now let's look at what they said were the group of patients who could be enrolled. I know it's difficult to read this, but read the bottom part of the slide. You've got to wait and wait and wait till your patient really proves to be in cardiogenic shock. You've got to wait 30 minutes till he's cold and clammy, his blood pressure is less than 90, he has some mental obtundation, his urine output is less than half a cc per kg per hour. Now that's waiting so long that your IABP is not going to work. When your blood pressure is 60 or 70 and you have a situation, I know you may say some of them were used early and all that stuff, but many a times they were used late. And this late use of IABP, where serum lactate levels have to be above 2 and stuff like that, really does not wait. You're waiting for the patient to be in gross cardiogenic shock. In gross cardiogenic shock, you're going to have more problems. Now look at this part of the slide, which I've pointed out to you right over here. And you can look up over there. There are, amongst all this, there's still some optimism. Look at the younger age group of patients, those below the age of 50 years. You can clearly see that there's a tremendous benefit in this group of patients. The younger patients fared better. You had even those below the age of 75, though not statistically significant, fared better. Patients with an anterior wall infarct did fare better. Those patients who had no hypertension fared better. And this is all important. It's not that it's unimportant. Look at it. You've got to discern the trial, and even amongst this group of patients, you can see that patients who brought in early, whose blood pressure was more than 90, more than 80, fared better. So it's not so bad as it's made out to be. The SHOCK trial has its points. And as was mentioned by Harish, you can see in the trials that had thrombolysis alone, there was benefit in patients who had thrombolysis is a form of revascularization. And when you put in an IBP in the earlier trials with thrombolysis, they showed benefit. And it was only this one group of PCI, and I think the selection has not been good. So proper selection of patients would certainly benefit patients. The younger age group, as I mentioned, rapidly deteriorating patients. I can tell you, in any one of us, in the lab, any one of us, when you see a patient rapidly deteriorating in spite of inotropic support, we get in and rush in with an IBP, and I can show you a number of examples when I present my case. Patients with mechanical complications, all of us put it in directly, and patients with significant mitral regurg, even if they do not have a papillary muscle rupture, you will see that IBP makes a big difference. And this is clear, and clear can be that you don't wait too long. The correct timing is so important that 86% of them had it in the shock trial. That's stunning. That's absolutely stunning. They should have had it before. And patients should be receiving IBP support before their blood pressure has crashed. So what are the messages that I want to give you? First of all, select your patients properly. Don't wait for them to be too late. Correct timing, as we mentioned. Proper technique. You can't have people put 2 IBPs in a year and say that these guys can handle IBP. They can't handle IBP. You need expert hands. You need understanding of the machine. You need timing in the IBP balloon pump. You need to know how to use your inflation and deflation timings. I don't think people who have such a small experience can really. And adequate care of ventilation and other factors also make a big difference. I've seen many patients have an IBP without ventilatory support. I think all these things are important, and more data to support the use of IBP. I think even the chief investigator said that there's a paucity of trials actually. This is not sufficient to tell you. And from the old experience, not only from cardiogenic shock, there are so many other areas where people have found benefit with IBP. The unstable angina patients not responding to medical therapy, supporting IBP for patients after the high-risk patients in surgery that we send patients on IBP for. This is not part of the cardiogenic shock, but you can see that it is used as a bridge. So I want to thank you and say that, you know, you can be at the poolside today if you really use IBP, and I'll show you a case presentation now, not to show you where I possibly made a mistake. I don't want to show you something where, you know, I did everything gung-ho and therefore everything went off well. I'll show you where maybe my timing was not very good, and then take you forward to that. Can somebody come here and help me with the next presentation? Where is it?
Please come and help his video presentation.
Okay, I got it. This is a patient who is 47 years old, just recently done. The only risk factor was his family history and an inferior wall infarct, possibly in the circumflex therapy. He was thrombolized with tenecteplase outside, referred the next morning. He came in on this kind of a blood pressure, which you can see over there. His saturation was low. His echo showed, at the shock trial, I possibly would not have wanted to put in an IBP, because I said this is all the features where IBP has shown no benefit. And I followed the shock trial. Let me say as we go forward. This was his angiogram. You can see that he had triple vessel disease, but his circumflex was the culprit vessel. And then we decided that we would open up, because everybody is saying now in the shock trial, revascularize the patient fast. So we revascularized the patient fast. In view of the acute infarct, we opened up the vessel. The oxygen saturation still remained low. In fact, the PO2 was around about 60 or a little less than that. The patient was put on BiPAP, and post-procedure, the saturation improved a little bit. The blood pressure still remained low, and the requirement for the noradrenaline and dopamine were extremely high. So Lasix and other things were given. This is the procedure to show you we protected basically the large obtuse marginal branch, but it was quite a straightforward procedure. Went through quite quickly. We opened up both the vessels and put a stent in the main branch, and we got a reasonably good result, as you can see. That was a fairly good result. But what happened after that? On day 2, patient continued to remain about the same. His saturation stood over there. His blood pressure stood where it was. His heart rate remained 100 plus all the time. And Or next, you have a patient who's lying over there, who's got, maybe you'll say, I haven't revascularized him completely, it's a cardiogenic shock, you may have to do more revascularization. And then we looked at the shock trial. What did the shock trial tell us? If you put an IBP in, you're not going to get much benefit. So possibly I think no significant benefit out of that. But I think on day 3, we had lost patients a little bit. Persistent hypotension, tachycardia, X-ray chest showing pulmonary edema. We decided let's get into some further management. Let's now think about something besides just the shock trial. So IBP, get infusions in, and revasc. So we put in an IBP. We went in, we did through the right radial approach, we did the PTCA to the RCA. I don't know whether that really helped or not, but we stepped up his dose of Lasix, but with the IBP, there were certain advantages that we got. One, we got his blood pressure up. Because we got his diastolic blood pressure up and we got his mean aortic pressure up, we were able to do much more. His heart rate settled down, his pulmonary edema started clearing up, and we were able to achieve adequate diuresis. And with the IBP support, we did the right coronary. Because we still had low saturations, we still had low blood pressure, this was a 47. Day 4, the patient remained a little better, but by day 5, he significantly improved. X-ray chest was showing clearing, his saturations were maintained, still on BiPAP of course. We got more negative in the balance. His heart rate had come down significantly. In fact, by day 4, it came down much more, and day 5, his blood pressure was showing better. We were reducing support, and I think on IBP, all of us see that. We see that support comes down much quicker, that we're not flogging the heart as we're flogging it on noradrenaline and dopamine without IBP. We continued for 2 days, pushed up the Lasix infusion, got him drier, and then we were able to actually get him off with adequate balance. We came down on the IBP support, and we were able to wean off this patient. And subsequently got the inotropes down and tapered. We didn't have to mechanically ventilate him. We had a non-invasive ventilator in the form of the BiPAP. And I think this kind of case shows you that possibly if we put in an IBP on day 1 itself, we would have got off even better. Because I think that support to the patient when he reads it, bring his blood pressure. I think tachycardia, if it's not caused by hypovolemia, but is caused by basically pump-related tachycardia, you have pump-related saturations which are down. You have evidence to show that there is patient, I call this a pre-cardiogenic shock kind of situation. His lactate was not abnormal. But I think that's the point in time when you need to put in an IBP, where you'll get a lot of support, where your patient becomes much more comfortable, and all of you have seen that. So I don't think the shock trial really gives us the evidence to step away from IBP adequately enough. I think we need many more trials, much more information before we can really say that. Thank you very much for your attention.